Chapter 10-11. Just another girl. The next day, it was Friday, my brother went to school and I went with my dad to his construction company. I was normal, with the new jeans and t-shirt that he had bought me. He had to make sure that the architects finished the remodeling project for a department store that they were going to present a few days later and details of other constructions before he could vacate. Whenever I accompanied him, he would show me how they did the plans, and different aspects of engineering and managing a construction company. I was never good at math, but thanks to those sessions with my dad, ever since then I understand and appreciate architecture and great engineering works. The appointment with the psychologist was at 5 p.m. During the meal, my dad told me that he had treated him and helped him a lot during the divorce with my mom. I did not know that he had been in therapy. He explained to me that he sought professional support for all the changes that occurred in his life with the separation, that in addition to what he missed my sister, me, and even my mother, he viewed a divorce as one of the biggest failures in a man's life. He explained that therapy helped him realize how his family's and society's expectations had affected him to the point of making him feel that he did not deserve to be happy. I was confused. I perfectly understood the feeling of not being what they expect of you, but I had never imagined that my dad could feel like this. On the other hand, I didn't know if I was really going to be able to speak and tell the psychologist what was happening to me. Not even I understood. I only knew that it was not correct. Finally, the time came. We arrived at the office, and we waited for a while in the waiting room until Serge came out and told us to go to his office. Once inside, he asked us, "How can I help you?" My dad told him that the day before Elle had come to live with him, and that because of everything they had discussed before, he had asked me what I liked, and I told him that I liked girls, but that I wanted to be one of them. I expected a reaction, but Serge remained calm. He only asked us, "Is that something that worries you?" "It is not so much that I worry, but he feels that he is not well," said my dad. "I understand," said the psychologist. "First, you must know what to expect from this process and how it works." Addressing me. "The first thing that is important for you to know is that this is your space. Here you can talk absolutely about anything you think or feel. You can get angry, you can cry, you can laugh, or you can simply not talk if you don't want to. It's your space and nothing what you say will be judged as good or bad. Second, I am here to help you understand and give context to what you feel and think with a single objective, to help you be happy," he continued. "If a therapeutic process doesn't help you to be happier, it's useless. And as I told you, it's for you, not for your dad or your mom or anyone else, but for you to feel adapted to your environment and therefore happier. So far everything is clear?" he asked me. I nodded my head. "Third, everything that you express here is absolutely confidential. I am not going to discuss it with your dad or with anyone except when you permit me to discuss it, or in your case, because you are a minor. If your life or the life of someone else were at risk, I would have to discuss it with your dad. Any questions here?" I shook my head. He asked my dad to wait for me outside. My dad left and I was left alone with the doctor. He asked me how I felt and if I wanted to talk or if I would rather draw some pictures that would help him to get to know me a little. I told him that I preferred to draw, and he took out some white sheets and a pencil. He asked me to draw a human figure. I drew a girl in a knee-length dress, strap-on sneakers, and shoulder-length hair in the back of a room. When she asked me to write a little story about the girl, I wrote that she was a girl who lived in that room and her mom wouldn't let her out. That she dreamed of being free and playing like the other girls. Then he asked me to draw a human figure of the opposite sex. I drew a younger boy, dressed in a karate suit and in a defense position. For his story, I wrote that he was a kid who practiced karate and that he was practicing for a sparring competition. On another sheet, he asked me to draw a person, a house, and a tree. I drew a girl in a tank top and short skirt sheltering from the rain under a leafy tree with fruit. In the background was a square, rigid house, without windows and with a small closed door. I wrote the story of a girl who went out to play but it was raining very hard, so she took refuge under the tree, which was her favorite place. The doctor received the drawings and said that he would analyze them later. That day we did not talk about my desire to be a girl, he only asked me how my relationship with my mother, my sister, my brother, and my father was. I told him in general terms that my sister used to be my favorite person, but that we had grown apart a few years ago. He told me that time was up and that in the next session we would talk about it if I wanted. I asked him what the drawings meant and he told me that he was going to study them these days, but in general, the first represents how I see myself. The second is my relationship with the opposite sex, and the third is my relationship with my parents. That we talked about it calmly in the following sessions. I left that first session a little worried about what the psychologist would see in my drawings, but at the same time feeling relieved to be able to talk to someone. He inspired me a lot of confidence. With the psychologist, in the next session we talked about my sister and inevitably about the Rhythmic Gymnastics Academy. I told him how I enjoyed being part of that group and how my mom promised to sign me up and I ended up in karate. We never really talked about my evenings with Sandy and the group of friends, but I was able to talk to him about how it bothered me to look in the mirror and how I always wondered what I would look like in those clothes. He also asked me if I had experimented with my sister's clothes and I did not dare to tell him everything, but I did admit to having tried on my sister's clothes in the company of my friend Carlos and precisely on the day we dared to go out. My aunt arrived and saw us. Since my dad had told me about my mom's calls, I assumed that he had that history. It didn't make me feel judged, on the contrary, we continued talking as if it were the most normal thing. I even thought about telling him everything I was still hiding. He asked me how I felt when I tried on my sister's clothes and if I liked feeling pretty when I saw myself in the mirror or attracting attention. I wasn't sure what to answer, but he told me that it was normal to want to look good. I told him that when I looked like that, I just felt like I was seeing myself. He asked me again how I felt when he saw me in the school uniform. I told him that I didn't like it, that I hated that uniform. Then he asked me how I felt when he saw me without clothes. I told him that I never saw myself in the mirror without clothes. He asked me if I hated the uniform or hated a part of me. I did not speak more. The session is over. In the next session we talked about moving to Adolf's house and how I lost my house and my friends. He asked me if I was angry with my mother for that. I felt enormous guilt, but I had to admit that yes, I was very angry with my mother. He asked me if, among all that I lost with that move, I had also lost part of the identity that I was beginning to form. I couldn't keep talking. I just cried. In the next session, he asked me if I agreed to talk with my dad about what he had seen during these sessions and the options he thought would be the best to continue. I said yes, although I didn't know what to expect. He explained to me that he was not going to talk about what I had told him, but about what he had concluded from our talks and from the tests we had done. Then he asked me if there was any subject that I preferred to avoid with my father. I thought about it for a moment, mentally ran through the things we had talked about and nothing came to my mind that could not be mentioned. He called my dad at the office, and told him that we had had some very interesting sessions and that he felt we had made a lot of progress. First I explained that he had done a couple of tests called Match-Orver's drawing of the human figure and HTP, in which he could see, before forming any opinion, what I unconsciously expressed. He said the results were very revealing and very clear. I listened with all my attention because after all, I had no idea what he was going to say. I didn't know if his diagnosis was going to be that I was simply a degenerate, or I was crazy, or I had to take medication or lock myself up. Although the psychologist had given me confidence during the sessions, at that moment I was very afraid of what he might say. He explained to us that, contrary to what people thought, sexuality was not linked to identity, that they were separate concepts that in most cases went hand in hand, but not always. Since none of us seemed to understand, he was clearer. He explained that identity is how you perceive yourself, the mental image you have of yourself, and in this case, gender identity is whether you perceive yourself as a boy or as a girl. But that is not necessarily linked to sexuality, that is, that you can perceive yourself as a man and that does not mean that you like women, or you can perceive yourself as a woman that does not mean that you are attracted to men. He explained something about the Oedipus triangle that I didn't understand at the time, but it explained how in the early years of development, before I really had memory, gender identity and sexuality were formed according to Sigmund Freud's theory. Of course, now I can write and explain that as an adult and as a psychologist, but at that moment, I felt like they were speaking to me in Chinese. After all this explanation, he said that according to the tests that he had done and what we had discussed, indeed I identified myself as a girl, and that this made it very difficult for me to integrate into my environment because it was like being in a body that didn't belong to me, like being in the wrong body. At no time did he use those words, Serge told my dad, but I understand that you have felt that way for years. Is that true, eh? He said, turning to me. For me that moment was very impressive. It was like I was with a magician who could read my mind. I just started crying and nodded my head. My dad hugged me and comforted me while I kept listening to the psychologist, who went on to explain that there were few studies on children with this situation, not because they don't happen, but because they are normally repressed by society and their families, that he had participated in a study in which they had discovered that many boys and girls with this situation, before facing their parents, preferred to commit suicide. He told us that precisely because of the few data that there was on children of my age, he could not give a definitive diagnosis, especially because in my case, there seemed to be no relationship between gender identity and sexuality. Because apparently, until that moment I only liked girls. Correct? He asked me. I nodded. This can complicate the situation a little more during adolescence, because if you start a transition to living as a girl. Transition? Live as a girl? Those words echoed in my mind and generated an indescribable emotion. The doctor continued. If that were the case, she would be a homosexual girl, and that would also complicate her adaptation to the environment. At that moment I felt that everything was falling apart again. But the time will come to deal with that issue. For now, the important thing is to help you define if, as I believe, we are really dealing with a gender identity issue, or if it is just a matter of development and curiosity that could be temporary. Could it be something like that? My dad asked. It is very unlikely, but since until now, she has never had the opportunity to experience life as a girl, it could happen that when she experiences it, it turns out not to be what she imagined. Especially for not matching gender identity with sexuality. Trying to understand, I asked. To experience? How? Addressing my dad. I know that it is not necessary to mention it to you because I know you, but anyway, it is important that for this, there is a total commitment of support and acceptance during a trial period so that she can experience it, even if it is a little bit of what life would be like as a girl. It was real. He was referring to me as she. I couldn't believe my ears. Of course, you can count on that support, said my dad. And also from your eldest son and anyone else who might be aware. My dad nodded and put his hand on my shoulder. What is there to do? My dad asked. We need, if she wants, to give her the opportunity to live as a girl at least for a couple of weeks 100%. This includes being talked to, treated, and, above all, behaving like a girl during that period, so that later, having lived through it, she can know if she wants to be a boy again or if she wants to start a transition process. Addressing me. Would you like it? A combination of excitement and panic washed over me. I didn't know what to answer. What was my dad going to think? Was he going to keep loving me? I was about to say no. My dad intervened. Would you like to try that? It would only be a few days, and if you don't like it, after that you tell us and you go back to your life as a boy. Yes. I won't want to go back, I'm sure. I told him with tears in my eyes. That's all for today. If you like this story, please like and subscribe. See you next week.